what if we looked at one of ones? Like, what one of one Michael Jordans exist? This isn't really something that Michael Jordan collectors talk about a lot. I was still locked in my old way of thinking, and I was like, nah, that Michael Jordan collecting is not about one of ones. And it's like, if you're so fortunate to own Michael Jordan's first one of one ever made, which is what that Platinum Masterpiece was, why wouldn't you just keep that card and see what happens? I have no idea what that card is worth. That card could be worth a wide range of possible values. And then, and then if I do have to sell that card to pay for a different one, now I'm under a time crunch. If you compare the Platinum Masterpiece and what it sold, which is $2.1 million, if you compare that to the Platinum Medallion, it only sold for about 38 times what the Platinum Medallion sells for. I think people like to have a variety. I think, listen to the brands you mentioned, we're talking credentials, we're talking on-card autograph from 84 Star, we're talking about exquisite. Adding this card to a collection that has those would be chef's kiss. It would be beautiful. And I was swiping through and I saw this card and my mind was blown. And I was like, I can't believe I was in the same room as this card. This is such a special card. If comps were the end-all be-all, then prices would never change. They'd never go up. They never go down.
Correct.
This is what it sold for yesterday. This is what I'll pay today. This is what the next guy will pay tomorrow. So already, I think comps have proven themselves over time to be a guide, not a determination.
Welcome back, guys, to another episode of the Courtside Investor Podcast. I'm host of Card Boss, and today I got a very, very special guest. This is the host of the Hodgecast. This is Chris McGill, awesome guy, and one of the most prominent names in the hobby that I've ever met. How are you doing, man, my friend?
Thank you for the very kind introduction. I'm a big listener of your podcast as well. I discovered it maybe 6 or 7 months ago, or maybe somewhere around there, and we started messaging. I think I reached out to you maybe even, and I just said I really like the work that you're doing. It's a real honor to be on with you. You've had a great lineup of guests, but I really also just love hearing you talk about your approaches, the 5 cards, which ones come in, which ones come out. So it's really fun to be here with you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for that as well. So, we're recording this at 7:30 p.m. Your time. So it's our clocks are reversed. I'm at 7:30 a.m. So normally the night before the recording session, I'll have a little chat with my wife, just letting her know I got a session the next morning and a bit about who's the guest that's coming on. Okay, and I talked a bit about you to her and said that, look, in preparation for today's podcast, I had to listen to Chris's latest podcast, which is about 108 minutes long, and he's one of the guys that can go on for a monologue, I would say, a podcast monologue for more than an hour. And she was like, that's the first thing, that's an amazing feat by itself. And the second of all, what's amazing is I actually sat through the 108 minutes to listen all of that. And it was interesting, all right? We're going to touch on that for sure.
Well, apologies. I apologize for that. I find that put me at how you can adjust the speed. You can maybe bump me up to 1.25 or 1.5, and then it goes much faster. And that's how I sometimes listen to content too, is I'll speed it up a little bit. So,
right. Cool, man. Cool. All right. I'm going to jump right in, to the meat of this conversation, which is about your one-of-one Michael Jordan quest. I'm going to talk a bit more in depth on certain sections, but I want to hear from you. I think that you perhaps have mentioned this a couple of times already. What was the train of thought, for you to suddenly jump into this, going on the one-of-one collection?
Yeah, it's a great question, and couple parts to that story. The first part of that story, our friend Brian, Cajun Cardboard, I guess 3 years ago now, invited me to come onto his channel and discuss his hierarchy project that he was working on. And, it was me, it was a few other collectors too. And the idea was let's have some good-spirited, well-intentioned debates about this card is in tier 1 and it should be in tier 2, or this card's in tier 3, it should come up to tier 2. And I just didn't really disagree with much. I thought he did an amazing job of putting that list together. So I kind of came with a curveball. And instead of doing that, I said, Brian, I know that you've excluded autographs, and you've excluded one of ones, and you've excluded certain categories from your hierarchy. And I get it. I completely understand why you did that. But what if we looked at one of ones? What one of one Michael Jordans exist? This isn't really something that Michael Jordan collectors talk about a lot. And so I started researching it, and I put together a little spreadsheet kind of like quickly before joining the show. I kind of procrastinated and I just put it together at the last minute. And then I brought it to the show and I said, well, I made this little spreadsheet and this is interesting. These are there's Michael Jordan has one of ones from the 90s. I had no idea what these cards were. And that sort of planted a seed. And so then I kind of would work on that spreadsheet once in a while. If I had some downtime, I just kind of, because like when I went on his show, I just did like maybe the first 2 years of Michael Jordan's one of ones, but he has, one of ones from his NBA licensed era, which ended in 2009-10. He has one of ones all the way through that season. So I started adding more seasons, just using checklist websites to keep building out this database. And, I just would work on it in my spare time. And then there was a moment where it all came together for me as a collector, where it went from just being something I was researching to something that I started actively collecting. And that was in June of last year, in June of 2025, a collector from Japan who focuses on baseball, mostly Cal Ripken Jr. cards and Shohei Ohtani. This collector posted a Michael Jordan one of the ones that I had researched and I'd put on my spreadsheet. And a bunch of people started sending me it, and they were like, you collect Michael Jordan? You're a big one of one guy. Look at this. Don't you want this? And
Yep.
I was still locked in my old way of thinking. And I was like, nah, that Michael Jordan collecting is not about one of ones. Like,
Yep.
that's
Yep.
I like my PMGs and my rubies, and like that's what I like. But after like the third or fourth person sent it to me, I was like, you know what? Why not? Let me see how I like this. And so I messaged the seller, and it was a big hassle. The seller was very gracious, gave me the provenance of the card, told me the story about buying it on a Japanese auction website. I think it was like Yahoo Japan auctions in like 2003. And they'd had the card ever since. They'd never graded it. It was still in raw, still in a one touch. And so, but it was a bit of a hassle because, sending PayPal internationally can be tricky, but we agreed on a price. And there was PayPal wasn't letting me send them money. So I had to like call PayPal. They had to call PayPal. I couldn't send them money. They had to send me an invoice. Then they had to send me 3 different invoices. Finally, we got it done. It was like really had to stick through it. You had to fight through it to get it done. Finally, we got it done. The payment got sent. They went and dropped off the package and shipped it. It showed up at my house a few days later, and I pulled the card out of the envelope, and it was love at first sight. And then ever since then, I've been on cloud 9, honestly, having discovered and enjoying collecting Michael Jordan's one of ones.
Nice. That must be quite a feeling, man. Like, you got like the grail that nobody ever thought of, right?
Right, exactly. And that's fun. Yeah. That's fun, but it's also, like, for example, I posted to Facebook some of the Michael Jordan one of ones, and to one of the Michael Jordan groups, and a lot of people were, liking it and saying how cool. But the most popular comment on my post was a guy saying nobody cares about these cards. And it got, like a lot of people liked it. Some people were laughing at it. I laughed at it. It's funny. It's true. But that's the other side of it, is that like, I love it. I love this category that I found. And it's, it's really like fueling my hobby passion for the last 9 months now. But it's not for everybody. In fact, it's very niche. It's under the radar. It's something that, people, they don't. I once looked at Michael Jordan collecting that way too. It's just like people, they want to see the PMGs, they want to see the rubies, they want to see the credentials. They don't really care for these cards, or at least not yet.
That's an interesting take on it, right? So the funny thing was, I had Brian on my podcast, and I wanted to get his thoughts on, what do you think of the direction that Chris went with this 101? And his response was, why didn't I think of it in the first place?
Yeah, Brian's very clever and diplomatic, but also, he sent me a link to one of the one-of-ones that I bought out of Fanatics Marketplace last summer. And like, he could have bought that himself. So I think he's
Right.
being kind, right? But I think he's actually happy that I'm not competing with him for the cards he really wants. I'm over here now.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, like I agree with you, right? I think I can safely say that 99.5% of Michael Jordan collectors, okay, wherever they start from, right at the bottom, would always want to steer towards that upper echelon, right? The PMGs, the credentials, and things like that. And nobody actually considers about going towards that very niche path you're on. And the fact that you're now on this for like 9 months or maybe even longer since the day they thought about it, right? And you're so far deep into it that I believe that there'll be perhaps no other collector that would want to embark on the same path. And how could they? Because, once they're in your collection, they're one-of-ones that they're likely not going to come out. And it'll be impossible for somebody to kind of like say, yep, I want to go on this journey as well.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, it's that the one-of-one collecting is a very different game. And I learned how to collect one-of-ones, not like it's anything super special or anything, but I learned about collecting one-of-ones by collecting ultra modern, right? So like my collecting arc was I started collecting MJ and I focused on like my aspirations. And remember, this was like 8, 9, 10 years ago, so the cards were much, much, much cheaper then. But I dreamed of owning PMGs and rubies, and then I started with his inserts, Noise Boys, Golden Touch, Scoring Kings. I've had many of those. A Cut Above, Skybox Premium 3Ds, like Thrill Seekers, all those. Like I've collected many of those, Beam Team, etc. I love those cards. But I eventually accumulated enough of them that then one day a PMG Red became available, and I guess the year was 2018, and I sold all of them to get the PMG Red, and then I was like really I was really, really excited about that, right? But as time wears on, our collecting tastes change and our preferences change and so on and so forth. And Michael Jordan cards got really, really expensive in the early 2020s. So I pivoted over into other players. I started looking at ultra modern players. I started collecting cards from Panini and active players and stuff. And in the Panini era, there are many more one-of-ones. The 90s doesn't have very many one-of-ones, but there's lots of one-of-ones from this era. And so, it's easier to get one-of-ones, and also one-of-ones are kind of more important, like because there's many more serial numbered cards today. So, a one-of-one from today is a bit easier to get than a one-of-one from the 90s. But I learned about collecting one-of-ones, and I developed an appreciation for it, and sort of building sets of one-of-ones, and like having a lineage of one-of-ones, like getting all of the Prism Black Finites of Christian McCaffrey. That was something that I really made a project. And I learned from collecting that way, sort of like how to find one-of-ones, how to negotiate with owners who have them, how to think about them in relation to other cards, and where they sort of stand in each player's kind of hierarchy in my mind. And it was doing that for like 5 years that like kind of taught me and ingrained in my mind that the one-of-one is a really special card. And then when it was only coming back to MJ when it sort of clicked in my mind, like, why don't I start looking at Michael Jordan's one-of-ones, and let's see where that might lead. And even then I needed a push. I needed somebody to push me. I needed multiple people to give me a shove to say, like, this is, this is something you should try, basically. And I did, and here we are.
Here we are today. Awesome. So I want to get your perspective on this. So for example, we take any modern player, Luka, for example, SGA, like you mentioned, there's tons of one-of-ones. And whenever one of these players come into auction, there's a huge battle, right? People go out for it because they just want it in their collection. And rightfully so, there's so many collectors. Similarly, for Michael Jordan, there are tons of collectors as well. But if a one-of-one Michael Jordan were to come up on auction, okay, let's not talk about that masterpiece that just recently sold. Okay, just a regular one-of-one. Would you, in your opinion, would you think that there will be as much fight compared to a modern player one-of-one today?
No, I don't think so. No, and we have, like, Michael Jordan one-of-ones do come up. Like I won a Michael Jordan one-of-one at auction in December. It's sold on Heritage. It's from the third year of Michael Jordan's one of ones, and it was from 1999 2000 Upper Deck, and it belongs to a set called Air of Greatness. And I love the card. Like as soon as I saw it, it took my breath away, and I knew I was going to compete for it, and I won it. And there just really wasn't much competition for the card. Like I won it at a fraction of what Michael Jordan's 90s numbered mainstream cards sell for. And so I just point that out as an example to say, they do come to market sometimes, and there's not much competition. People really don't. You don't really like on the Facebook groups, nobody's posting the comps and saying, "What do you think about this? Did it sell strong? Did it sell low?" They're flying under the radar. Nobody's really talking about them.
Yep, which is good news for you. So for you to able to put together more to that 72 that you're trying to achieve, right? But I'm just a bit curious. People are feeling that way today. But do you think that in some way down the road that people are starting to realize that, hey, maybe I should have just picked up a couple, even though I'm not gonna get all of them, but getting a couple of these playing days one-on-ones would have been nice to add to my collection. Do you think that people come to that realization one day?
A few people have. I know a few guys who have taken an interest in them, and I know a few guys who have been collecting them for a long time, way before I got into it.
Right.
And so there's always been some people who have gravitated to it, but I don't know if it ever takes a foothold. I could see it becoming a more focus on category among Michael Jordan collecting, but by the same token, it took me a lot to find them for myself. Like I had to go off and collect ultra modern for 5 years and then come back, and I think a lot of Michael Jordan collectors, they just always stick in the Michael Jordan lane. They don't really go back and forth and stuff. So
True.
I don't know. I don't know how that might work out. And I'm having a lot of fun sort of talking about it, and getting people's reactions and like seeing the guy on Facebook who was like, nobody cares about these cards, and like it's interesting to me to kind of see how people how people react to it, and if they care, or if they don't care, and why or why not, and it's fun. It's like an experiment sort of to see how collectors behave.
Right. Awesome. So, of course, plenty of the one-on-ones in your list, a lot of people haven't even heard of before. But of course, the one that everybody recognizes was the masterpiece, the Ultra 97 one-on-one that recently sold for 2.1. Okay, so on this podcast, I like to get into the emotions and the thought process of my guests on, whenever they look at a certain card. So when this card first was announced that was going to come to auction on Heritage, what was your initial reaction? Like, what was the very first thing that, boom, it's going to be on auction in about a month, okay? And what went through your mind?
A lot of things. I think like some of my earliest thoughts, and remember, this is just me. Like I'm not speaking for other people. I'm not saying this is how the community saw it, but how I saw it was, I can't believe somebody's selling this card. Like to me, it's like, Michael Jordan one of ones as a category of cards is just very new, even though these cards are almost 30 years old. But there's not a lot of momentum around this, and it's like, if you're so fortunate to own Michael Jordan's first one of one ever made, which is what that Platinum Masterpiece was, why wouldn't you just keep that card and see what happens? Like, but I say that, but there could be many reasons. Like sometimes people need to sell a card because they need to get some money for something else, or they just have grown tired of it. They want to move on from the card, or a million other reasons. But that was the first thing I thought was, why would somebody sell this card? This is unbelievable. And then that transitioned to my next thought, which was like, this is so exciting. I can't believe that Michael Jordan's first one of one is going to come to auction. Like this is something that I wasn't sure if I would ever see a sale like this take place, and not publicly. Usually cards like that might move privately, if at all. So then I was really excited to see the auction come out, and it was fun watching that auction. And then third thought is like, what would it take for me to win this? Do I have a shot to win this card, right? So so those are my early thoughts.
Was there ever a point that you would say in early on, right? Not after you digest everything, that I gotta give everything I have to try and get this card? Did that ever cross your mind?
Oh yeah. I mean, my whole collection was on the chopping block. My whole collection was potentially going to, get sold or consigned. to make that happen. So the thought
Yeah.
definitely entered my
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah, I remember watching one of your podcasts. This was early on before the auction ended. You were going through the list of stuff. You said, and you're going through, for example, your Jokic collection. Yep, this is gonna go. I'm gonna keep the Prism Black. That's gonna go.
Right.
That's gonna go. So I
Right.
was just, I didn't know the values of those cards. Or at that point in time, I was just trying to run through the math. How much would Chris able to accumulate? to put together. And I just had a number in my mind, like $1 million. Okay, and I was just thinking to myself, I'm not sure that's going to be enough to get it done.
Right. Well, I know. And I mean,
Right.
that's especially like the cards that I would have put up to try and finance it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them are already one of ones. And
Yep.
so
Yep.
how do you know what those are worth? Like
Correct.
some of the cards that would have been on the chopping block, for example, like one card that I have that would have gotten sold was a 2019 Prism Black 1 of 1 base set Nikola Jokic. Okay, like as an
Mm-hmm.
example, the cards that I was going
Yep.
through, that would have been one that got sold. I
Yep.
have no idea what that card is worth. That card could be worth a wide range of possible
Yep.
values. And then, and then if I do have to sell that card to pay for a different one, now I'm under a time
Mm-hmm.
crunch. So I don't get to like try and find the right buyer or wait for the market to be
Correct.
at the optimal condition or wait for the Nuggets to win a championship hypothetically. Like
Yep.
I can't take advantage of timing at all. Now
Yep.
the buyer has leverage over me that they can use. So that probably would have been tricky to navigate too. But I was definitely prepared to give it a shot. But
Yep.
I didn't end up needing to do that.
That time crunch thing, it's kind of like interesting comment you made. I've been under that gun many times, right? Something comes up that you really like, and you try and work out this math on trying to see whether or not you can do it and how much of your existing collection that you're willing to sacrifice. So a lot of times, you're saying that, yep, I can do this, I can do that, and then, but at the end of the day, once the numbers don't work out, it's like, yep, I gotta pass on, and maybe the auction ends, and then you have this little remorse that God, I should just went a bit more and things like that. So I've gone through that situations, but I've gone through a situation whereby I had a card, not to the magnitude of this 1 of 1 Jordan. It was a 2014 Noir Logoman tag Kobe autograph, BGS 9. So the first year Noir, number 3, highest grade BGS 9 that came up on Golden. So the funny thing was, it sold on Golden last June for about like 60K. Okay. And then it came out auction again last November. And after the auction ended in June, I was telling Adam Gray, who has a copy of that card in a lower grade, saying, oh man, I just love the card. I kind of regret not going on for it. And then when it came up the second time, right, Adam says that, look, this is your shot, man. You got to go all in. And I kind of like locked into my mind that I was willing to sacrifice everything for it. And indeed, I went the distance. But of course, everybody has their limits, right? So there will be a number that you can't breach. And I was telling myself, okay, we're getting very close to that number now, because if I were to go above that number, it means that I'm going to give out cards that I didn't really want to give. And the funny thing was, the auction just ended right on the line, just like $1,000 below the line.
Yeah.
And instead of being happy, the funny thing was, instead of being happy, I was just kind of like, man, why did it have to push me all the way to the limit? I wasn't happy with like a 10% difference or something, but you got to get to. So, but of course, after I got the card in hand, the feeling changed completely. I just love the card. It's in hand. So I think that's the satisfaction or the happiness that you get, from achieving or getting a card that's so important to you.
Well, yeah, I mean, the black and white theme of that Noir card with the
Mhm.
Logo Man tag next to it is so beautiful. I love when a card has like a black and white theme and then the red and blue of the Logo Man is just so beautiful. So that's a really beautiful card. And Adam has a really interesting theory about when a very rare card, comes to auction twice. He's like, the second time is like a huge opportunity because the market already saw it come to sale once. There's not really the same energy. There's not the same excitement. It would be like if the Platinum Masterpiece sold again in like 3 months. It'd be like, oh, why is this getting turned around and sold again? But it doesn't. Adam's approach is that it doesn't look that way from the long run. From the long run, it's a great opportunity to take advantage of less market enthusiasm for a card like that. And And then, there's a great rush from getting something at a good value, but there's a different rush from it being painful and pushing you to your limits. And
Yeah,
then it's a different appreciation once you have the card and what it meant and what
yeah,
it took to get it.
for sure, man. All right. I'm going to continue on about the masterpiece, right? So I watched your entire podcast, all 108 minutes of it, you running through the numbers in your head and the valuations and your thought process. I completely understand where you're coming from. Okay. But I do have some questions. So of course, for those who did not watch or did not listen to the podcast, Chris had a valuation roughly between 500K to $1 million, give or take, roughly around there. Okay. So my thoughts was, okay, you had the basis of doing the calculations, which I understand. That's coming from a point of view. But looking from the outside, looking at this card itself, relative to all the other big Michael Jordans that's out there, you talk about the PMGs, the credentials and stuff like that. And let's talk about the recent sale of the PMG Red, PSA 5 that just sold for $640,000. Would you reckon that a masterpiece 101 would sell or would be worth more than a PMG Red? Given your assessment is just 500K, which is lesser than the PSA 5 PMG Red?
Yes. So comparatively to a PMG Red, let's say, both of these cards coming from 1997-98, which is the Last Dance season, which is Michael Jordan's last active season with the Bulls.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of variables that are similar across these two cards. So given that these are both 97 issues, and given that the PMG Red is very, very beautiful, but it has 90 copies, and it has a superior version, which is the green,
Mm-hmm.
which has 10 copies, compared against the Platinum Masterpiece, it's no contest to me that the
Right.
Platinum Masterpiece is much, much more desirable. And in fact, here's a different way of thinking about it too. So the Platinum Masterpiece has an undercard, which is the Platinum Medallion, which has 100
Correct.
copies. And that's in a grade of near mint and like a PSA 8 condition that last sold for 54,000. So that's another way of saying sort of that how much more should the one of one be than the out of 100? And I think no matter what way you look at it, if you compare the Platinum Masterpiece and what it sold, which was 2.1 million, if you compare that to the Platinum Medallion, it only sold for about 38 times what the Platinum Medallion sells for. And, so for example, if somebody had on a table in front of me 38 Platinum Medallions or the one Platinum Masterpiece, I'd much rather have the one of one, right? Like now, even if you had 100 platinum, if every Platinum Medallion was over here, all 100 of them, I find the one of one Masterpiece to be more desirable. So, from that point of view, the market, so it's like, for example, like the market said it was what I guess about 3 or 4 times a PMG Red in an average grade of a PSA 5. That's not how I value those. I would rather have the Masterpiece than 10 PMG Reds. But that's just me too, all right? So that's just me. I have my own biases. I'm coming at it from a very specific collecting point of view. Where I'm hyper focused on Michael Jordan's one of ones, and this is his first one of one ever. So like I'm really, really excited about it. And I'm not trying to take away from like the PMG Red. I own a PMG Red also. I think the PMG Red is maybe the most beautiful card ever made. But to answer your question, I think the Platinum Masterpiece is a really, really special card.
Right. Of course. So, with these I'm going to touch a bit about valuations later on in this podcast. But when you look at some of these high-end, super rare, like the one-on-one masterpiece, right, it's very hard to do a math to kind of work out the value. So it's more of like what I mentioned earlier. What are you willing to trade off to acquire it? So one example is that you pointed out, do 38 platinum medallions, right? Will you swap it? People say, yeah, in a heartbeat. Okay. But if I take a different example, a different approach, like if you throw comps out the window, okay, just looking card versus card comparison. So the recent sale on Goldin 100, so you had a couple of big Michael Jordan cards. You had a PMG Red, I mentioned. You had the Essential Credentials 97 that sold for about like 220K. You had the exquisite number pieces, the nice one that sold for about $500,000. And I believe you had a 86 Fleer Jordan autograph, I think sold for like 300 or 400K. I can't remember the exact numbers. So you take these 4 cards and you combine them together. Roughly, if you look at the values, they're almost the same. Okay, not equally the same. But if you put these 5 cards on the table, 4 cards in one pile and the masterpiece on the other pile, as a Jordan collector, not as Chris McGill, but as a Jordan collector, which pile would you take?
So, like, if I were to answer this question from what I think, like maybe one of the people in the Facebook group, the Michael Jordan collecting groups, like what do I think, like the market,
Yep.
like, or one of those people, I think most people are taking the pile.
Yep.
Yeah, I think most people are taking the pile, and I think one thing that I think people like to have a variety. I think like listen to the brands you mentioned. You know, we're talking credentials, we're talking a star on card autograph from
Yep.
84 Star. We're talking about exquisite, like the very prestigious brand of the 2000s. You know, so I think like people and a PMG, right? Like so, you know, that's a very exciting mix of cards. And I think people would be very excited to be a part of those cards. And all of those cards will, from time to time, record a sale. And you can kind of have a better idea of what those cards are worth. You know, you can kind of track it a little bit more. And also, like, I think people have an understanding, too, that going too high, like going to skewing all the way to like the highest end, that that there's there might not be room for growth there. The same room for growth might not be there that exists on cards that are a little more accessible. Now, we're still talking about 6-figure cards here. So, like, those aren't very accessible either. But there's plenty of people who are interested in 6-figure cards, and the amount of people who could bid $2 million on a Michael Jordan 90s 1/1 is very, very low. And then you know, next time it comes up, how many, you know, if you're expecting there to be a return on that, how many people can bid $3 million? You know, even fewer, right? So like I think people grasp that too, that the prospect of a return is probably going to be better on the exquisite, the PMG, the signature marquee cards, and that Michael Jordan's first 1/1 is very special. It's a very museum-esque piece. But how many people out there want to build museums? I think I don't know that that's a big motive for people.
Yep. Interesting point that you made. So when I first started my business, buying, selling sports cards, right? And I had this thought that, look, I'm going to do cards that's going to be between 500 to 2,500 because I believe that anything's above 2,500, the ability to sell or how quickly you can sell is going to really depreciate because not many people want to fork out more than 2,500 for a card, right? So 500 to 25. And that number scaled up because the as time goes by, that number kept increasing, right? Between 2,500, then it's 5K, then it's 10K, and suddenly people are spending 50K, no problems. And then now we get to the threshold, 6 digits, 100K. We're still seeing lots of 100K cards going out, the big cards. But what's the next threshold? It's going to be like, you know, is it 250? But like what you mentioned, the $1 million mark, that's a whole different ball game altogether. So I do understand where you're coming from. I don't think that card, even though it may be worth 2, 3, 4, 5, but there's just not that many people who can afford to pay for that, correct?
Exactly. And so that's something that the collector has to think about, right? And like, and what if you got bored of that card and you wanted to get out of it and get into another card? You know, can you find a buyer, or do you need to sequence a sale, or do you need to set up an auction basically and like have to run it through the auction house and then deal with maybe a buyer on the other end who needs to finance it and it's going to take 6 months to pay for it? I mean, it could take a while to get your liquidity out of that card too. So I think all those things sort of, some people are going to think very carefully and deliberately about that, but even people who don't, I think they sort of grasp it intuitively that like, you know, it's a big responsibility taking ownership of that card, and it can change your ability to, you know, take equity out of your collection if you want to. It can make it really hard to do that. So, but for me personally, I know you didn't ask, like you're asking now for like the point of view of the market, but for me, you know, the museum aspect of that card outweighs it all. The prestige of owning a card like that makes all of these other like obstacles worthwhile.
Which is going to lead me to my next question. Do you know who's the buyer?
I don't. I'm so curious. I've saw a few people on social media saying that they bid, but they didn't win.
Right.
But I don't know who the buyers. I don't know who the buyers of the platinum or the purple. And you know what? We might not know for a little while because the
Okay.
buyer might be financing it, or they might be sending in cards to help pay for
Yep.
it. You know, so
Until
we
it's done, right? So
exactly.
right. Which comes back to another question. So of course, when it first came out, everybody's saying that this is a card that Chris is gonna go for, right? He's gonna go for everything he can. Uh, Now that Chris, has come up and said, "Look, I'm not a winner." Okay, so and you mentioned this is a museum piece. So what do you think a buyer profile who will want to own this card? What kind of collector would he be? Because we just mentioned earlier that 99% of Michael Jordan collectors will gravitate towards the basket, right? The PNGs and blah blah blah. But who besides Chris would want to own such a card?
Oh, great question. Great question. How do we profile this buyer? Well,
Yes.
one is Nat Turner. Okay. One is Nat Turner, right? And I do really hope that he was the winner. And
Right.
Nat has, for example, so from 1997-98, Michael Jordan has 7 one-of-ones, and
Mm-hmm.
Nat owns 3 of them. He has so the way that those break down is there's 2 from Ultra, there's
Mm-hmm.
4 from Flair Showcase, and there's 1 from Upper Deck. And so Nat has 3 of the 4 from Flair Showcase, which are the Row 0 Masterpiece, the Row 1 Masterpiece, and the Row 2 Masterpiece. So adding this card to a collection that has those would be chef's kiss. It would be beautiful. So I hope that those cards all got put together. So that's an example, right? Nat is a collector who has put together such a meaningful collection, not just in
Mm-hmm.
Michael Jordan collecting, but in all of the different genres that he collects. And he collects a lot of different stuff.
Yep. Yep.
So he's a guy who I think would be interested in making a move on that card. But if it's not him, then, I don't know how many others out there are the demographic for this card. I don't know how
Yep.
many people out there who would be swept off their feet by this Michael Jordan's first one-of-one.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really good question, and I don't really know. Outside of myself and Nat, I don't know. So I'm so curious to see who won this card.
Would you think that any institutional investors will look at this card and says, "Yep, this is a super long-term play." I would, shout out like, for example, like a Secure, even though doesn't fit their profile, but something along those lines. That yep, if we're gonna make a big splash in the hobby, this is the one. This is the one card that we want to target.
I'd be very impressed if one did, but I don't think so. And here's the reason why. There's too many layers of risk. So
Mm-hmm.
they're already sort of, if we're talking at an institutional level, they're already making a bet sort of that this sector, that trading cards and that sports cards will continue to fare well over time. And that's one layer of
Mm-hmm.
risk. But then the second layer of risk is then you would also be making a bet that at some point people will really care about and desire to own Michael Jordan's earliest one-of-ones. And
Mm-hmm. Yep.
that's a whole second bet. And so
Correct.
maybe if the portfolio already was 90% iconic cards that are very visible, very mainstream, and then there was this 10% where it says we can mix in a little extra risk because we're already mitigating it by all these other things.
Right.
Maybe I could see it working out in that situation, but I
Mm-hmm.
think that a card like this at this juncture in the history of appreciating Michael Jordan's earliest one-of-ones, I just don't think that the risk makes a lot of sense at that price. I think
Right.
that they'd probably stay away. That could be different if these one-of-ones ever became more mainstream cards, and
True.
and and a lot would have to happen for that to take place. But it could change then. But as things stand right now, I'd be really intrigued if that was the case. I'd wonder what they were thinking.
Got it. Got it. Coming back to Nat. If for example, let's not discuss whether Nat is the winner, but if you knew that Nat was going to pursue this card, like he made it public, look, I'm going for it. Okay. Would you ever consider that you had a shot to try and get it?
No, because well, see, first of all, not to paint myself as some selfless, you know, uh, person because I'm certainly competitively trying to build up my own collection, but I would love to see that card in his collection. I would love to see that card come together with the other Flair Showcase one-of-ones that he has. So I would love for that to happen. So if I did find out that he was going for it, that would be one of the first thoughts that I would have, is that he could put together something really special by bringing those together. Then secondarily, if he does make up his mind that he'll win it no matter what, then he will.
Yep.
So also there's no point. There would be absolutely no point in me competing for that card.
Yep.
And then, the only thing I would say is that if I really had it in my heart to win that card, and I really believed it was going at a value that made sense to me, because that's a very important part of this too, then I would compete for that card up to the point that I thought it made sense for me. And because maybe Nat would have a different analysis, like how passionately is he going for it? Maybe he likes it up to a certain price and then he doesn't like it after that price anymore. So you never really know where everybody's tap out price is at. So you have to give it a fair shot. But like you sort of mentioned earlier, I completely understand how this card got to the value that it got to. And I get how there's actually an argument that it undersold relative to other Michael Jordan cards. But from where I'm sitting in the lane that I'm collecting, which is Michael Jordan one-of-ones, this was very, very expensive relative to other Michael Jordan one-of-ones out there.
Right. Yeah, look, I'm not in your position, but of course, when I look at it from a card perspective, this would have been like the crown jewel of the apex, I like to call it, right? The apex of your collection, right? Even though there's 72 and you own about like 35 now, I think, right? That's what you mentioned.
I own 18 of his first 72, and I have 35 total, but some of them are not from the first 72.
Got it. Okay, so 18 from the first 72. Even that's got to be ranked number one. Okay, so the opportunity to buy it, it may come down, it may haunt you a little bit down the road, when you think about it. But again, as of today, $2 million is a lot of money.
Yeah, it is, man. And it would also my collection is already very tilted towards Michael Jordan, but this would have made my collection all Michael Jordan, which is great, right? Michael Jordan's great.
Yep.
But I like having a mix of players. This is Michael Jordan's first one-of-one. I also have Nikola Jokic's first one-of-one. And it would have been cool to put that together with MJ's first one-of-one. That would have been the first one-of-ones of two of my favorite players ever. But it just, Michael Jordan collecting is a totally different ball game. And and there's just the waters are filled with sharks who are bidding strong.
Nice. Okay, I'm gonna move away from Michael Jordan. We're spending quite a fair bit on him already, and going to one of the players you just mentioned, Nikola Jokic. All right, it's one of your favorite players. You have one of the most extensive collections. You have the Prism Black one-of-one, so your collection of Jokic is tip top already. But I want to get some thoughts. So there was a recent flawless one-of-one, non-auto, true rookie that just sold for 170, 180K recently. Did you make a play on that?
Well, once again, I was very interested. So Nikola Jokic has 36 solo one-of-ones from his rookie year, and then 2 more that are multiplayer one-of-ones. So he has a total of 38 one-of-ones from his rookie year. And then within that group, 20 of them are from base sets. And then within that group, only 10 of them are what I call traditional or pure base set one-of-ones, meaning no autograph, no memorabilia, and it's the first appearing in that base set. So those to me are 10 holy grails within Jokic's holy grail category of his rookie year one-of-ones are those 10. And this flawless base set diamond one-of-one belongs to that group of 10. It is, like you said, his true rookie card from Flawless. And I first learned about this card when it was graded at the National last summer. And PSA graded it, and then they made a social media post. And they'll do that. During the National, they'll make some social media posts to say, just graded, and they'll show, 5, 10 cards or whatever. And I was swiping through, and I saw this card, and my mind was blown. And I was like, I can't believe I was in the same room as this card. This is such a special card. And then it came to auction, and I completely I completely underestimated its value. I was thinking
Okay.
this was going to be a card that sold for 30 or 40,000, and had it
Really?
sold, and had it sold for that price, I would have won it. I certainly
Hmm.
would have won it.
Yep.
But it didn't, right? Like it ended up going for multiples and multiples of that. And so, yeah, that's just when I have to know, given my budget, my constraints, my limits, and given where I estimated it was worth and what could I do with that money, what is the opportunity cost of that money for me, and how important do I find that card to be to
Hmm.
Jokic's collection. On the one hand, it doesn't surprise me that it sold for that strong. It's a very, very special card. But on the other
Yep.
hand, at that price, it's for somebody with a bit of a bigger budget than me, I think. So, and both
Right.
those things can be true. Like I would love to own that card. I don't think the market uh, improperly valued it at all. But I think that for me, given all of my collecting constraints and goals and budgets and how many Jokic cards I have, how many Jordan cards I have, given all the different things I take into account, that price was well beyond where I wanted to be.
Right. All right. Interesting. Interesting. When it first came out, Adam Gray covered it on his Across the Hobby, and he was saying that it's going to be a 6-digit card right off the bat. Okay. I texted him after that, and then we had a little bit of a discussion on that card. And I was saying, really, it's 6 digits, right? Even though it has all the qualities as you mentioned, true rookie, Jokic, 3-time MVP, blah blah blah. But is it a 6-digit card for a non-autograph, non-logo man? So. And he said, yeah, definitely so. So I was thinking myself, look, if it's going to be like a 70, 80K card, I don't mind making a play on it, given that how important that card is in the Jokic space. But true enough, it went the distance, way beyond. So I saved this question, I want to talk to you, you being a big Jokic collector, compared, where does this sit rank compared to all the other Jokic cards that you already have at the moment? I know the Prism Black is kind of like ranked at the top, but where would this sit if, let's say, you were to acquire it?
Very, very, very high. I think just looking at rookie year Jokic's, I have 5 of his rookie year one of ones,
Mm-hmm.
and I like the Prism Black one of one more, and it's a very special one because it's his first one of one ever made too.
Yep.
But also the Prism brand has a big premium on it and stuff. And then, but Flawless is a very, very prestigious special brand too.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody were to say that this Flawless is maybe one of his top 5 or his top 10 cards ever made, I think a very good argument could be made to that effect. Jokic has a few other cards. Like you asked me to only evaluate in terms of where it would rank among mine. It might rank
Yes.
second, but it might
Right.
rank second. The only one that I'm hesitating, and this isn't really a value thing. I have no idea value wise, but like I also really cherish a different Jokic one of one rookie that I own, which is the totally certified mirror blue one of one.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like that one because it's very 90s esque. It's super shiny. It has etched hollow foil. It's a
Yep.
really pretty card. But so I don't know. It would maybe be the second or the third if I were to acquire that card. But Jokic does have several other cards that most people would probably rank ahead, such as he has an immaculate Logoman autograph one of one, which
Uh-huh.
is his only rookie year Logoman autograph one of one. That's a solo
Yep.
card. He has an NT autograph one of one. So the one of one parallel to his, he doesn't have an NT RPA, but he has an NT autograph card in the National Treasures base set. That has a one of one parallel. That's a very, very special card. He has an immaculate Logo Man in addition to the Logo Man autograph. That's actually at auction right now.
Yes.
And I think that's already over 200,000. So there's maybe one or two others, depending on how you feel about his Select Black one of one. I think that's a really, really special card. Most players appear in multiple times in the Select base set, but Jokic only appears once in Select's
Yep.
base set, so this is his only Select base set one of one rookie. So it gets real interesting. Like I said, I think overall that's somewhere between a top 5 and a top 10 card. And if somebody could rank it, as high as they want, honestly, it's a matter of preference.
Yeah, interesting for sure. Because like I said, you in terms of base one-of-ones, you definitely have the Apex, which is the Prism, right? So I'm just a bit curious on where would this sit. So ranking between top 5 or ranking number 2, it's kind of fair, I think, in my opinion.
Oh, it is. And then there's one other card that I think I might like better that I own, which is I have his first ever game worn Logo Man autograph from Immaculate. And it's his second game worn Logo Man autograph ever made. And they both came from the 2017-18 season. So it's his second ever made. It's his first from Immaculate. And being from Immaculate is special because Immaculate made his RPA. Like Flawless didn't make an RPA for him. National Treasures didn't make an RPA for him, but Immaculate did. And Immaculate produced that Logo Man autograph one from his rookie year, but that's player worn. The one I have is his first game worn. So I might rank that one above it too.
Nice. Cool. All right. So final topic, totally a bit different. I'm going to talk a bit about Card Ladder.
Sure.
Okay. So of course, people know you as a founder of Card Ladder. And prior to Card Ladder, I think people used to just check eBay sold. Okay. And today, Card Ladder has become a very essential tool for people to check on comps. Look at what last sold. It's so easy to use. The interface is great and has lots and lots of data. But it has come to a point that the comps or the data that's produced by Card Ladder, people feel that we shouldn't be relying solely on comps anymore. It should be just as a guide to determine what values should be, which is a very fair statement, I think. But from your perspective as the guy behind Card Ladder, when you put together all this data, do you also believe that valuations should be subjective, determined, as opposed to being very objective, as maybe people say, oh, the average of the last 3 or the average of the last 6 or something like that? What do you think of that?
Yeah, great question. And the reason why Card Ladder looks so nice is because it was designed by my great friend, Josh Johnson, Cardboard Chronicles, who, is the only developer on the app. So it looks great. It functions great. He built a masterpiece. And, Card Ladder is a team. It's a team of people. It's several co-founders, and I'm just one person on that team. But, okay, so to get to your question, Jeremy Lee has made remarks to the effect of what I'm about to say, which is that if comps were the end all be all, then prices would never change. They'd never go up. They never go down.
Correct.
This is what it sold for yesterday. This is what I'll pay today. This is what the next guy will pay tomorrow. So already, I think we have to start from the idea that comps have proven themselves over time to be a guide, not a determination. They don't, just because it sold for that yesterday doesn't mean that that's what the next person's going to pay tomorrow. Maybe they'll pay more. Maybe they're willing to pay less. So that's like the starting point, is that there's a lot of flexibility in pricing in this hobby, even for cards that sell 10 times a day. Like you were mentioning SGA. SGA's Prism-based PSA 10 could sell in the same day for anywhere from $120 to $250 on the same platform, even from the same seller. That's a big spread, right? That's a big, and that's kind of the auction setting can create that. And it might be as simple as somebody was too slow to type in their max bid at the end, and somebody got a steal, or somebody overpaid for a different one. They put in a mega bid that was too high. So there's always a lot of variability in comps. And that, so I want to start there by saying that we already know that comps are treated as a guide, as opposed to, it must sell for this and it will only trade at this price. And then I want to take it a step further and say that people are increasingly using their critical thinking skills to figure out what they want to buy or sell cards at. And they are looking at comps as a piece of data that they consider. And it's a very important piece of data for a lot of reasons. Like when a price gets printed, especially in the auction setting, there's a bid history, and there's oftentimes multiple people who were bidding for that card, and there's only one person who can win and lots of other people who lost. So when an auction price gets printed, it does stand to reason that there were other people out there who probably got pretty close to wanting to pay the same price, And then actually the underbidder ends up setting the price because the second highest bidder is the person who sets what the card sells for.
Correct.
The winning bidder just pays the minimum increments over that. So,
Correct.
there's good theory to support why, especially prices set at auction, it's not unreasonable to expect that there's probably somebody else out there who's willing to pay a fairly similar amounts because there's these other bidders. But so with all that in mind, I think people are starting to take a critical look, and they're starting to distinguish between an auction result versus a fixed price or a best offer result.
Yep.
And they're starting to consider that momentum changes, and something that was hot last week might not be hot this week, and vice versa. Something that was a little bit cooler last week, like Ohtani, he gets hotter every week. So, people factor those things into consideration too. And I personally, like, my personal opinion is that I strongly encourage people to take a critical eye towards comps. And I strongly encourage people to not chain themselves to the comp, and that the only input that they use in making their decision is, well, what did it sell for last time? And then even if they're willing to deviate from it and say, well, I kind of feel like I'd pay a little more, or I kind of feel like I'd pay a little less, there's more information than just the comp. The comp is what somebody else paid for it. But what is the card? Tell me about the card. Like, is this card significant? Is this from a brand that you like, or would you be better served waiting for a card that you find to be more beautiful, or from a brand that you like more? Or, does this card have significance to your collection? Or, does that make you maybe value it a little bit more? Or, what story does this card tell? Is the photo from an event that you really like, or do you really happen to think the photo is special, and so this is a card that you like a little bit more, or it's a card that you don't like as much? And how many other cards does the player have? Like, how many true rookie cards do they have? And so is this the right one, or should you wait maybe for a different one that's a little bit cheaper, because that's also a true rookie card too, and you might like that one better. So bringing in all these different factors. And then also, what do the other players sell for? Like, am I only collecting Michael Jordan, or do I just like the 90s? And maybe I'd be willing to look at a Tim Duncan card or a Shaquille O'Neal card, because those are only a fraction of what Michael Jordan's going for. So the more information I have about the card, about the history of those cards, about population reports, about the price of not just this card, but other similar cards, comparative goods, all these things, like, the more we can involve and triangulate value by using relevant information, I strongly encourage that. I think that leads to a more fun and satisfying collecting experience.
Definitely agree with everything that you said. I think that this is what we call the evolution of collecting. So if a person just started out in the hobby today, wanted to buy a card, he's a fan of Luka, for example, right? And it says, I want to buy some Luka cards, maybe some base prisms or whatever, okay, within my budget. But he's not very sure on how much he should pay. So obviously he's going to check the comps, what he paid for, pay roughly around that price, and he's happy about it. And then, of course, as time goes by, he buys more expensive cards, more important cards, more relevant cards. And then up to a certain stage, he'll get to what you just mentioned, right? How significant this card is. Where does it rank? How does the card look aesthetic wise? How's it compared to the next one? Things like that. So it's an evolution process for a lot of people. And I think that people who still, it's not that it's wrong or things like that. No, I think it's just a phase of where people sit within that collecting evolution. So where perhaps you sit, or maybe the top, say, 20% of the people sit right now, is what you just mentioned. Looking at cards a different way, valuing it in a special way, looking at it, comparing in a different way, as opposed of checking the numbers from an app.
Bingo. You nailed it. And I think we're on the precipice of that. I think we're all maturing together. I think such a big percentage of this hobby are people who came back within the last 10 years, or even more so within the last 5. And I meet, as part of my job, new people join the hobby every day. So some people have been here for 2 years, some people have been here for 5, some people have been here for 10, some people have been here for 20, 30, 40. And I think as a cohort, we're all kind of going through this together. We're learning from each other. We're learning how to approach things from each other. We're getting more sophisticated. And it takes a while, like having a tool like a card ladder institutionalized and being reliable, dependable there every day, something that you know you can count on, that you can use, that sort of lets you build on top of that. Like, okay, now I
Yep.
know I can get all the price information. Now, what else can I start thinking about? Where
Yep.
else can I go to start enhancing my collecting, thinking more critically, bringing in more variables, having more fun collecting? So I think that's where we're at. I think we're at the precipice of that as a cohort, as a group.
Awesome, man. Awesome. That's an interesting comment. All right, man. So before we wrap up, this has been a great conversation, man. And it's like almost an hour just flew by. It's amazing. Cool. Okay, one last question before we close up. I want to know, I'm curious, right? From the hobby perspective, what are you obsessed with right now? Like, what's on your mind every single day? Doesn't matter. Is it a card? Is it card ladder or whatever? Okay, what's that one single thing that you're completely obsessed with right now?
What I'm obsessed with right now is learning. I'm obsessed with learning. I'm obsessed with learning about cards that I didn't know about previously. I'm obsessed with learning more about cards that I thought I knew, but that actually there's many more things to learn. And I'm interested in learning from other collectors who are taking the time to tell the stories and the background and share the research that they've provided for their cards. And so that's what's really fueling me. And like that's fueled my Michael Jordan 1-of-1 project, but it's fueling all of my collecting is the discovery process of unearthing these hidden gems. And it's very addictive. Like once I went down the rabbit hole of learning and taking the time to like research all the full checklist that players offer, and it could take a long time. Like Patrick Mahomes is a player I collect. It took me quite a while to research all of his different rookie year 1-of-1s. And I actually built a spreadsheet of every rookie year card of his that exists. And that can take a lot of time, but it's very exciting. It's too exciting because I start doing the research and then I just want everything. I'm like, oh my gosh, I had no idea this existed. This is amazing, and this only costs 10% of that. I need this right away, and so I have to discipline myself into completing the research and then have a cooling off period and get some distance from it, and then come back to it and revisit it and say, okay, these are the ones that I rank the highest. Especially, and then these are the ones I think are the best value. And so I'm going to be patient. I'm going to wait. And when these do come up, or if I ever do get a lead on one and I can pursue one, I will strategically do that now that I'm comfortable with my research and I know what's what.
Nice. All right, cool, man. I'm gonna ask you for one more piece of advice. So normally, people ask, what would you advise people, starting in a hobby and things like that? That's a very common thing to ask. But you being an experienced guy, what advice would you give a person like, let's say to myself, who's been in this for a while, who's experienced, but not to your level, but what sort of advice or what sort of tips that you would give to a person like me?
Well, first of all, I respect your experience level and your thoughts quite a bit. I learn from you, and I love listening to the things you have to say. And you asked amazing questions, and it was a real pleasure to get to talk about the hobby with you for this episode. And I don't really look, so let me start by saying this. I'm in no position to give you advice. I think you are doing amazing. And I think that, I learn quite a bit from you and from listening to you, and you inspire me. And selfishly, I want to encourage you to keep making content and to keep telling us about your collecting journey and keep sharing your points of view. I feed on that. I love that. So, looking at where you are as a collector and what your goals are and where you're going, my advice to you would be the same advice that I give to myself, which is just keep learning and keep taking us along on the ride with you and keep enhancing your collection and keep sharing it. And it makes the hobby a better place, having people like you in it, telling their stories, sharing their points of view. Keep that up. I really like that.
Thank you so much, man, for the kind words. And I'm going to take that to mind. All right, man. Awesome. Thanks, Chris. This has been an amazing 1-hour conversation, thoroughly in-depth discussion. I was for the longest time, not say for the longest time, for the past couple of weeks, ever since that masterpiece came to auction, I was really wanted to know what's in your head. The guy just wanted to know, because I'm pretty sure there's lots of emotions, lots of thought processes going through, especially a person like yourself who's always in these kind of deep thoughts and able to express themselves for in a monologue for more than an hour, which is very, very interesting. So thank you so much for today's session.
Thank you for having me.
All right, cool, man. That's a wrap, guys. Thank you for watching the Courtside Investor Podcast. Do subscribe for this channel for more guests in the future. On behalf of Chris, thank you so much. Till next one, Cowboys out.